My rich aunt left me everything, $3 million and a house. My parents who abandoned me 10 years ago showed up. We're your guardians. But when my lawyer arrived with the will, they went pale. My heart was beating so loudly that it seemed everyone in the intensive care corridor could hear it. Aunt Mira lay motionless, surrounded by wires and tubes, while the monitor by her bed beeped short signals, the only indication that she was still alive. Her face was swollen, there was a huge bruise on her left cheek, and her left arm was in a cast. "Can she hear me?" I whispered to the nurse who was changing the IV. "Maybe," the woman replied softly. "Talk to her." Sometimes it helps. I took my aunt's healthy hand. It was cold. "Aunt Miro, it's me, Margot. You have to wake up, okay? We still have so much to do." But the words stuck in my throat. What did we have to do? I was finishing my last semester of college, and then there was the great unknown. My aunt never talked about my plans after graduation, as if she thought I would always live with her. 10 years ago, when I was 12, my parents just disappeared. Dennis and Sharon Crawford. Yes, I had their last name, even though I hadn't felt like their daughter for a long time. They drank, fought, and yelled. And then one morning I woke up and they were gone. There was a note on the table. "Margot, we've gone to find a better life. Stay with Aunt Mira. She'll take care of you." Aunt Mira was my mother's sister, but they hardly ever spoke. Mira lived in a big house on the outskirts of town, was unmarried, and devoted herself to her work. She owned Coleman Insurance, which had offices in 5 cities in Virginia. When I showed up at her doorstep with a small suitcase and teary eyes, she didn't ask any questions. "Come in," she simply said. "I'll show you to your room." She didn't officially adopt me. She said it was complicated, expensive, and that my parents might come back. But I knew the real reason. My aunt was afraid of getting attached. She had been lonely all her life and was used to relying only on herself. Our relationship developed slowly. At first, it was just an agreement. I helped around the house, cooked dinner, kept things tidy, and she gave me a roof over my head, food, and pocket money. My aunt worked from early morning until late at night, often traveling to offices. At home, she was tired and not very talkative, but gradually the ice melted. I learned that my aunt loved dogs, although she never had one herself. She was afraid she wouldn't be able to devote enough time to them. Every Saturday, she went to an animal shelter and volunteered there. Sometimes she took me with her. "Look," she said, petting another stray dog, "they don't blame anyone. They just enjoy every day." When I turned 16, my aunt called me my girl for the first time. I finally felt like I had a home. Our evenings became special rituals. My aunt would come home from work at 7, and I would serve dinner, usually something simple but tasty. We would sit in the kitchen, and she would tell me about her day, how Mrs. Davis had tried again to insure her 20-year-old car for its full value, how there had been a fire at the office in Norfolk, but luckily the alarm had gone off. "How are you?" she always asked at the end, and I told her about college, about my teachers, about my classmates. My aunt listened attentively, sometimes giving advice. She never meddled in my affairs or controlled my every move, but I knew she was always on my side. At 15, I fell in love for the first time with a boy from a parallel class. When I came home with teary eyes after the breakup, my aunt didn't ask for details. She just brought me some ice cream and sat down next to me. "You know," she said then, "life is like insurance. You never know where trouble is waiting for you, but that doesn't mean you should be afraid to take risks." When I turned 17, I got my driver's license and my aunt bought me an old car. It wasn't new, but it was reliable. "Now you can drive with me to the shelter," she said with a smile. We started spending more time together. My aunt taught me the basics of the business, how an insurance company works, how to assess risks, how to communicate with clients. I even went on a few business trips with her to other cities. "Maybe when you finish college, you'll join the business," she joked. But I knew it wasn't a joke. My aunt began to trust me more and more. She told me about problems at work and consulted with me about new investments. Sometimes it seemed like she was preparing me for something. Last summer was particularly important. My aunt took me with her on a business trip to Virginia Beach. We stayed at a nice hotel, and after meeting with clients, she had a free day. "Let's go to the beach," she suggested unexpectedly. Aunt Mira on the beach was something incredible. She sat in a deck chair in her business suit and looked at the sea with a strange expression on her face. "You know," she said quietly, "I never thought I'd have someone who would want to go on vacation with me." "What about your friends from work?" I asked in surprise. She laughed, but sadly. "Margot, when you devote your life to business, you don't have many friends left. Most people don't understand why I work 12 hours a day." Then I realized for the first time how lonely she had been before I came along, and how important I had become to her. "Why did you never get married?" I asked. "There was someone," she replied after a pause. "A long time ago, but he wanted me to sell the company and become a housewife. It didn't work out. We sat in silence listening to the sound of the waves. Then my aunt suddenly stood up. "Let's go into the water." "Auntie, you're wearing a suit." "So what?" She took off her shoes and walked into the water. I ran after her. We stood knee-deep in the sea, Aunt Mira in her business suit and me in my jeans. She laughed more sincerely than I had ever seen her laugh before. "You know what, Margot," she said, looking at the horizon. "I'm so glad your parents turned out to be so irresponsible. Otherwise, I would never have met you. At the time, I didn't know that this would be one of our last happy memories." The accident happened on Tuesday evening. My aunt was returning from her office in Richmond when a drunk driver ran a red light and crashed into her car. I was called to the hospital at 1 o'clock in the morning. The doctor said she had a traumatic brain injury, a broken arm, and internal bleeding, which they managed to stop. "The next few days will be critical," he explained. "She's in a coma, but that doesn't mean we should give up hope." I practically lived at the hospital for 5 days. I only went home to change clothes and bring my aunt her favorite flowers, white chrysanthemums. I talked to her and read aloud from a book she had left on her nightstand, some detective story about an insurance agent who solved crimes. "Do you remember," I whispered to her, "how we went to Virginia Beach last summer? You were so afraid of the water, but you still went in up to your knees. And then we ate shrimp at that cafe, and you made me laugh with a story about a client who wanted to insure his goldfish." But my aunt didn't respond. Only the monitor continued its monotonous beeping. On the 5th day, the doctor approached me with an expression I really didn't want to see. "I'm very sorry, Margot." My world fell apart. The next few hours flew by in a blur. Documents, phone calls, funeral arrangements. I lived in my aunt's house for those 5 days, but I knew I would have to leave soon. Who knows who would get it? Probably a charity. My aunt always said that after death, money should be given to those in need. I called a few friends from college, hoping that someone would be able to put me up for a few weeks. "Margot, I'd love to, but we're renovating," Jessica replied. "My father-in-law is visiting for a month," Amber explained. "My mom is against it. You know how she feels about guests." Brian sighed. "In the end, I had to rent a room in a cheap hostel on the outskirts of town, just for a few days, until the situation with the house was sorted out. Sitting on a narrow bed in a room I shared with some college girl who smelled of cheap cigarettes, I felt truly alone for the first time in many years. Aunt Mira was gone. My parents had been gone for 10 years. I had no one. Tomorrow was the funeral. And then, uncertainty. The Eternal Rest Funeral Home had never seemed so crowded to me. People arrived throughout the morning, some in black suits, others in everyday clothes, but all with that special expression that appears when someone is trying to look sad, but is actually calculating their own benefit. I sat in the front row, looking at Aunt Mira's closed coffin. The white chrysanthemums I had brought contrasted with the bright bouquets from people I didn't know, from grateful clients, from the Norfolk office team, from the board of directors. Even the dog shelter sent a bone-shaped wreath, the only thing that made me smile. "Margot, I'm so sorry," said a woman in her 50s wearing an expensive black coat. "I'm Patricia Lomax, the assistant director from Richmond. Mira mentioned you often." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Over the past 2 days, I had heard countless similar phrases from people I had never met before. "She was a wonderful woman," Patricia continued, "and a very smart businesswoman. I wonder what will happen to the company now." There it was. Even on the day of the funeral, people were thinking about money. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "We didn't talk about it." Patricia nodded sympathetically, but I noticed her exchanging glances with a man in a gray suit standing nearby. An elderly woman with a cane sat down next to me. "Are you Margot?" she asked quietly. "I'm Mrs. Delilah from the shelter. Mira told me about you. Finally, someone who really knew my aunt." "Thank you for coming," I whispered. "She loved you very much, child. She said you were the best thing that ever happened to her." The woman stroked my hand. "Don't pay any attention to these people. They're here because they heard about the money. The ceremony was beautiful but impersonal." The priest, who had never met my aunt personally, spoke in general terms about dedication to her work and love for animals. I wanted to stand up and tell them about the real Mira, how she bought donuts for the whole office every Friday, how she worried about every dog in the shelter, how she taught me to play poker and always lost on purpose. But I kept quiet and listened as strangers talked about my aunt as a successful businesswoman and philanthropist. They didn't know that she cried over movies about animals and always left huge tips for waiters who seemed lonely to her. After the ceremony at the cemetery, a short man with glasses approached me. "Margot Crawford? I'm Harold Finnessy, your aunt's lawyer. We agreed to meet tomorrow at 10 in the morning to read the will." "Yes, of course," I replied. "There will be several interested parties present," he added. "Relatives, company employees. It's standard procedure. Interested parties. None of these people cared about my aunt while she was alive." That evening, I returned to my hostel and lay on my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. My roommate, Christy, a student at the local college, tried to strike up a conversation with me. "Listen, I heard that your aunt died. I'm sorry." "Thank you." "Was she rich?" "I also have an aunt who owns a house in Florida. I always wonder if she'll leave me anything." I turned away toward the wall. Even here, it was impossible to escape human greed. "I'm sorry," Christy added after a minute. "I didn't mean to be tactless. It's just, money makes people strange, you know?" She was right. Over the past 2 days, I had seen people change when the subject of my aunt's inheritance came up. Even those who barely knew her suddenly became close friends or important partners. The next morning, I arrived at the lawyer's office 15 minutes before my appointment. The reception area was already full of people. I recognized Patricia from the funeral, several company employees, and 2 men and a woman I had seen among the relatives. "That's Mira's niece," whispered one of the women as I walked by. "She lived in her house." "Of course, she had the best opportunity to influence her," replied a man with a red mustache who introduced himself as the aunt's cousin. "She lived off her for 10 years, added the woman. "She must have worked hard on the old lady." I pretended not to hear and sat down in the corner. My heart was pounding, but I tried to stay calm. Harold Finnessy came out at exactly 10 o'clock. "Good morning, everyone. Please proceed to the conference room." We sat down around a large table. The lawyer opened a folder and put on his glasses. The room was so quiet that you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. "The will of Mira Coleman, drawn up on March 27th of this year." He looked at everyone present. It should be noted that this document was rewritten the day before Mrs. Coleman's death in the hospital when she was fully conscious and in the presence of 2 witnesses. A murmur rippled through the room. "Rewritten?" A red-haired man raised his voice. "And the previous will provided for the transfer of all property to the Virginia Animal Protection Society," explained the lawyer. However, the new version contains significant changes. I knew my aunt wanted to leave the money to the dogs. She must have changed her mind and decided to give part of it to the shelter and part to one of her relatives. So, continued Harold Finnessy, according to the last will and testament of Mira Coleman, all her assets, including the residential building at 23 Oak Street, the Coleman Insurance Company with all its branches and offices, as well as cash in the amount of $3,900,000, are transferred in full to her niece, Margot Crawford. The silence was so thick you could hear a pin drop. "What?" I blurted out. "In addition," the lawyer continued, as if nothing had happened, "the sum of $50,000 is bequeathed to the Virginia Animal Protection Society and $5,000 to each employee of the company who has worked for more than 5 years. "That's impossible," Patricia exclaimed. "Mira said she would leave the company to the employees." "This must be some kind of mistake," added the red-haired relative. "The girl only lived with her for 10 years. We are her real family." "Real family?" I couldn't help myself. "Where were you when she had the flu last winter? When she had surgery on her leg 3 years ago? Which one of you ever visited her on her birthday?" "Margot," the lawyer said quietly. "Let me finish reading." The lawyer calmly took several sheets of paper out of the folder. "I have here a medical certificate stating that Mrs. Coleman was of sound mind at the time the will was drawn up. There is also a video recording of the procedure and the signatures of 2 witnesses, a doctor and a nurse. The document is completely valid." "Where is the previous will?" Patricia was still agitated. "We want to see it." "The previous will was officially revoked by the new one. This is standard procedure." I sat there stunned. $3,900,000, a house, a company. It was unbelievable. "She bribed her with something," shouted the red-haired relative, pointing his finger at me. "The girl sucked up to her to get the inheritance." "It's disgusting," added the woman sitting next to him. "Mira was lonely, vulnerable. She was taken advantage of." "How despicable you are," I blurted out. "You only wanted her dead." "Please calm down," the lawyer intervened. "The will was drawn up in accordance with all legal norms. If you have any objections, you can appeal to the court." "We will definitely appeal," promised a relative. "This is unfair." "Fair is when you don't abandon a child at the age of 12, I retorted. People began to disperse, whispering indignantly. Patricia stopped next to me. "I hope you understand that running an insurance company is not a game. 54 people work there. Don't destroy what Mira has been building her whole life." "I'm not going to destroy anything," I replied, "but I'm not going to let myself be controlled either." When the room emptied, the lawyer handed me the keys to the house and the documents. "Congratulations on your inheritance, Margot. Mira left a letter for you." He handed me a sealed envelope. "Read it at home." I walked to the parking lot on wobbly legs. In my pocket were the keys to the house where I grew up, but which was now mine, officially mine. The house greeted me with silence. I went to the kitchen and sat down at the table where my aunt and I used to have our evening conversations. The envelope trembled in my hands. "My dear Margot," the letter began in my aunt's handwriting. "If you are reading this, it means I am no longer here. I hope you are not too upset that I have left you with this mess. I know you think you're not ready for this, but over the past 10 years, I've watched you grow up and seen in you what I lacked at your age, the ability to care for others. You didn't just live in my house, you made it a home. A company isn't just about money, it's about the people who depend on it. Patricia is a good person, but she only thinks about profit. You will think about people. Don't let them force you to sell the company or give it to someone else. You are stronger than you think. And remember, I believed in you enough to entrust you with everything that mattered to me. I love you like the daughter I never had. Aunt Mira. P.S. In the safe behind the painting in my bedroom, you will find company documents and contacts of reliable people. The code is your date of birth. I read the letter 3 times until the words were engraved in my memory. My aunt believed in me. I don't know why, but she did. The next few weeks flew by in a whirlwind of meetings, documents, and phone calls. Patricia, although dissatisfied with the situation, agreed to help me understand the basics of the business. Other employees treated me with caution. Who knows what a 22-year-old girl might do with their workplace? I moved back into my aunt's house and tried to get used to the idea that this was now my home. Every evening I sat in the kitchen with documents, studying financial reports and contracts. My aunt was right. The company was profitable, but it needed constant attention. Every day brought new challenges. Customers called with questions, employees asked for decisions, competitors tried to poach the best agents. But gradually, I began to understand the logic of the business and even make the right decisions. Just when I started to feel that I was more or less in control of the situation, the last people I expected to see appeared at the door: my parents. The doorbell rang at 7 in the evening as I sat in the living room with company documents, trying to understand the monthly reports from Norfolk. Over the past 3 weeks, I had gotten used to the fact that no one came without warning. All business meetings were planned in advance, and friends, well, I didn't really have any friends. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. A middle-aged couple was standing on the porch, a man in a worn jacket and a woman in a cheap coat. They looked familiar, but I couldn't figure out where I knew them from, until I saw his eyes. Dennis Crawford's blue eyes staring at me through the glass door with the same expression I remembered from childhood. Half guilty, half defiant. My heart leapt into my throat. Margot? I heard a familiar voice. Sweetheart, it's us. My hands trembled as I unlocked the door. Standing there were my parents, older, more tired, with gray hair and wrinkles around their eyes, but definitely them. Hi, sweetie, Sharon smiled, and I saw that she was missing a few teeth. We missed you so much. 10 years. 10 years of complete silence, and now they were standing on my doorstep, smiling as if nothing had happened. What are you doing here? I managed to say. We came to see our daughter, Dennis replied, trying to look over my shoulder into the house. We heard about Mira's death. I'm so sorry. She was a good woman. A good woman. The man who had left me on her doorstep like an unwanted puppy was now talking about her as if they had been friends. Can we come in? Sharon asked. It's cold outside and we've been driving for so long. Part of me wanted to close the door and call the police, but most of me, the 12-year-old girl who still lived somewhere deep in my soul, wanted an explanation. I wanted to know why they had left and why they had come back now. I stepped aside and let them in. My parents entered the living room and looked around. Dennis whistled. You live well, he said. Mira always had a taste for nice things. You've grown so much, Sharon added, looking at me with a strange mixture of pride and awkwardness. You've become a real beauty. And so grown up? I stood in the middle of the room, not knowing what to do. Offer them a seat? Make coffee? Kick them out? Have a seat, I finally said. Would you like something to drink? Coffee would be nice, Dennis replied, sitting down in my aunt's favorite chair. It made me angry. What right did he have to sit there? I went to the kitchen, trying to calm down. My hands were shaking as I made the coffee. Over the years, I had imagined this meeting many times. Sometimes I yelled at them. Sometimes I cried. Sometimes I was coldly polite. But in all my fantasies, I knew what to say. Now I had no words. When I returned with the tray, my parents were sitting side by side on the sofa, quietly discussing something. Here's our hostess. Dennis smiled, taking a cup. A real lady. Tell us about yourself, dear, Sharon asked. How's school? What are you doing now? Really? They want to talk about my life as if this were a normal family visit. I graduated from college last month, I replied briefly. Well done, Dennis exclaimed. What did you major in? Business administration? Wow, seriously, Sharon nodded. Mira must have been proud of you. Proud? Yes, my aunt was proud of me. But where were they when I graduated? When I was struggling through my first years of college? When I was sick or upset? Listen, Margot, Dennis began, setting his cup on the table. We know we showed up suddenly, and we know you may have questions for us. Questions? I couldn't help myself. You disappeared 10 years ago. You left a note on the table and left. We didn't want to, Sharon said quietly, but we had no choice. Your dad lost his job. We were evicted from our apartment. We didn't know where we were going to live. We couldn't just drag you around the streets with us, could we? You could have picked me up later, I replied, when you found a place to live. We wanted to, Dennis assured me. I swear we did. But then we thought, you'd be better off with Mira. A big house, stability, opportunities. Did your phone work? I asked sarcastically. Mail? Couldn't you have let us know you were alive at least once in 10 years? My parents exchanged glances. We wanted to wait until we were on our feet, my mother explained, so we'd have something to be proud of. We didn't want to show up like beggars. And how did that go? I asked. Did you get on your feet? Another awkward pause. Dennis scratched the back of his head. Well, times are tough. The economy, unemployment. We tried. 10 years of trying, and they look even worse than when they left. How did you find out about Auntie's death? I asked. There was an obituary in the newspaper, Sharon replied. We still get the local newspaper online. It's interesting to follow the news from your hometown. So you followed the news, but not your own daughter. And you decided to come to the funeral? I didn't hide my sarcasm. A little late, it was 3 weeks ago. We only found out yesterday, Dennis said. The newspaper arrives late. As soon as we read it, we got on the bus. So they still don't have a car. Where do you live? I asked. In Los Angeles, Mom replied. We rent a small room. It's not much, but it's a roof over our heads. A room. After 10 years, they still rent a room, and now they're sitting in my house. The house that became mine thanks to the woman who took me in after they abandoned me. I'm sorry about your aunt, Sharon said, and her voice sounded sincere. She was always good to us. Even when your mom and I were fighting. You fought? Mira didn't approve of your dad, Mom explained. She said he drank too much and couldn't hold down a job. She was right, of course. Dennis grimaced but didn't argue. Did she take good care of you? He asked. Yes. Very well. What will happen now? Sharon asked. Where will you live? So that's it. That's why they came. Here, I replied briefly. Here? Dennis was surprised. Who gave you permission? The house now belongs to, some of Mira's relatives. The house belongs to me, I said quietly. The silence was deafening. To you? My mother repeated. What do you mean? My aunt left me everything in her will. The house, the company, the money. My parents stared at me as if I had said I flew on a broomstick. Everything? Dennis managed to say. What do you mean, everything? Coleman Insurance, this house, and about $4 million. Sharon coughed so hard I thought she might choke on her coffee. 4 million? She repeated hoarsely. Less, 3,900,000 to be exact. Dennis stood up and began pacing the room. Holy shit. Sorry, honey, wow, that's incredible. Why did she leave everything to you? Mom asked. Obviously you lived with her, but I'm not her biological granddaughter, I finished for her. Yes, I was surprised too. And now you're running the company? Dad continued to question me. At 22? I'm learning. I have experienced employees who helped me. My parents exchanged another glance, so eloquent that words were unnecessary. Listen, sweetie, Dennis began, sitting down again. Haven't you thought that we're also entitled to part of the inheritance? We're your parents, and you're a minor. I'm 22, I interrupted. But when Mira drew up the will, you were younger, and legally we are your guardians. We were, I corrected her, until you left me. We didn't leave you, Sharon objected. We temporarily placed you in Mira's care. Temporarily? For 10 years? Circumstances prevented us from returning earlier, Dad explained, but that doesn't mean we legally abandoned you. I started to feel nauseous. Did they really think they had a right to my aunt's money? Listen, I said, trying to stay calm. I'm glad you're alive and well. You can stay for a few days if you need to, but the inheritance is my money and my responsibility. Don't be so selfish, Dennis said sharply. We're your parents. We're also Miri's relatives. Very distant relatives, I remarked. And you abandoned me. We didn't abandon you, my mother raised her voice. We did what was best for you. Best for me? I laughed bitterly. You know what was best for me? When Aunt Mira sat by my bed every night for the first 3 months because I cried and asked when you would come back. When she took me to a psychologist because I was afraid that everyone I loved would leave me. When she never, not once in 10 years, made me feel unwanted. Margot, Sharon began, but I interrupted her. No, you didn't come here because you missed me. You came because you heard about the money. That's not fair, Dennis said. Of course we missed you. But it's also true that we are your parents and we have rights. What rights? I interrupted. You disappeared when I was 12. You didn't pay child support. You didn't call. You didn't write letters. My aunt raised me alone, paid for my education, bought me clothes, took care of me when I was sick. She was more of a mother to me than you were. I looked at Sharon. That's why she left me her inheritance. But legally, Dad began. Legally, you can go to court, I cut him off. But morally, you have no right to this money. My parents exchanged glances again, and this time I saw determination in their eyes, not confusion. Maybe you're right, Mom said unexpectedly softly. Maybe we really don't have moral rights, but we do have legal rights, and we're going to use them. What does that mean? I asked, although I already guessed. It means we're going to court, Dennis said. She'll contest the will. Mira was old and lonely. You could influence her. Get out of my house, I said quietly. What? Get out of my house, I repeated louder. Now. Margot, don't be like that, Mom began. We're family. Family? I laughed. Family doesn't abandon 12-year-old children. Family doesn't show up 10 years later just because they heard about money. You're not my family. Aunt Mira was my family. I stood up and walked to the door. Get out. My parents slowly got up from the sofa. You'll regret this, my dad said at the door. We'll go to court, and we'll win. Go ahead, I replied, and closed the door behind them. Then I slid down the door to the floor and cried. Not because they were gone, but because even now, after everything, part of me hoped to hear a sincere apology from them. The next morning, Harold Finnessy appeared at my doorstep with a large folder of documents. I need to talk to you, he said seriously. This is important. We sat down in the living room, and the lawyer opened the folder. Yesterday, 2 people who identified themselves as your parents contacted me. They want to contest the will. I know. They told me. Margot, there's something you need to know. After your parents left you, Aunt Mira went to court to have their parental rights terminated. I stared at him. What? The proceedings lasted 2 years. In the end, the court ruled that Dennis and Sharon Crawford had abandoned their child without proper care and terminated their parental rights. Officially, you have no parents from a legal standpoint. Why didn't Auntie tell me? She didn't want to upset you. She said you'd been through enough already. Harold handed me a folder. Here's the court decision. Your biological parents have no legal rights to you or your inheritance. If they try to go to court, this document will close the case immediately. I looked at the paper, not believing my eyes. Aunt Mira had protected me even from things I didn't know about. "One more thing," the lawyer added. "Last night, your former parents tried to book a hotel room on Main Street. They didn't have any money. They were seen at the bus station at 5 in the morning. It looks like they've already left town." After the lawyer left, I sat in my aunt's living room for a long time, holding the document terminating parental rights in my hands. My aunt knew they might come back, and she was prepared for it. She was protecting me even now when she was gone. For 3 weeks after my parents' visit, I lived in blissful ignorance that it was all over. Harold Finnessy assured me that the document terminating their parental rights would make any claims on their part impossible, and they themselves disappeared from the city as quickly as they had appeared. I began to think that I could finally focus on running the company and building a new life. How wrong I was. The court summons arrived on Thursday morning with the regular mail, electricity bills, and advertising flyers. The official envelope with the district court logo stood out among them like a snake among flowers. "Dennis Crawford and Sharon Crawford vs. Margot Crawford," I read, not believing my eyes. "Case for the invalidation of a will." My hands trembled as I read the text of the lawsuit. My parents claimed that Aunt Mira was mentally incompetent at the time the will was written, that I had improperly influenced her during the years we lived together, and that the will contradicted her previous intentions to leave her estate to charity. I immediately called Harold Finnis. "How is this possible?" I shouted into the phone. "You said that termination of parental rights would solve everything." "Calm down, Margot," replied the lawyer, but I could hear the concern in his voice. "They are filing the lawsuit not as your parents, but as interested parties. They claim to be close relatives of the deceased, but that's not true. Unfortunately, they found a loophole in the law. Besides," he paused, "I have to tell you that I won't be able to represent you in this case." "Why?" "My wife is sick, and we need to go to the Canary Islands for treatment urgently." "I'm sorry, Margot, but I can no longer take on the case." After that call, I sat in the kitchen for an hour, staring at the summons. How dare they? How did they find a lawyer who agreed to take on such a case? I spent the next few days looking for a new lawyer. Most refused. The case seemed hopeless, and who would want to fight a young heiress on behalf of parents who had abandoned their child? Finally, I was recommended Jeremy Staten, a young lawyer who had just opened his own practice. Jeremy was about 29, thin, with perpetually tousled hair and glasses that he nervously adjusted during conversation. His office was located in an old building in the city center, and half the furniture looked like it had been bought at a garage sale. "It's a difficult case," he said, looking through the documents, "but not hopeless. The problem is that your parents hired Robert Kingsley." "Who's that?" "One of the most experienced lawyers in the state. He specializes in inheritance cases. Expensive, but very good." "Where did they get the money for a lawyer like that?" Jeremy shrugged. "Maybe he's working on a percentage of the winnings. Or someone is financing the case. The trial is scheduled for the end of the month. I had 3 weeks to prepare, and every day was a challenge. In the morning, I tried to run the company, and after lunch, I met with Jeremy to prepare for the hearing. The worst part was that people started looking at me differently. At the coffee shop, where I always bought coffee on my way to work, the cashier avoided eye contact. Company employees whispered in the hallways, and Patricia openly expressed her doubts. "Maybe we should consider a settlement," she suggested during another meeting. "Give them a small share and close the case." "No," I replied firmly. "They don't deserve a cent." "But if the court rules in their favor, you could lose everything." "Then I'll lose. But I won't give up without a fight." Patricia shook her head as if I were an incredibly naive child. The hardest part was that I began to doubt myself. Was my aunt really of sound mind when she rewrote her will? Did I influence her unintentionally? Maybe she felt obligated to leave me money because I took care of her. These thoughts tormented me every night. I lay in bed, remembering the last months of my aunt's life, looking for signs that she might not have been entirely sane. But all I could remember was a smart, determined woman who knew exactly what she wanted. A week before the trial, Jeremy brought bad news. "They found witnesses," he said gloomily. "3 people are willing to testify that Mira had been acting strangely lately." "Who?" "Mrs. Holloway, her neighbor, says Mira often forgot to lock her car doors. The supermarket cashier says she tried to pay with cash several times, but forgot where she kept her wallet. And another one, a doctor from the clinic where she had a checkup." "What kind of checkup?" "A general examination a month before the accident. The doctor noted that she had problems with short-term memory." I felt sick. Why didn't my aunt tell me about this? "But that doesn't mean she was incompetent," Jeremy added. "Many elderly people have similar problems but remain fully competent." "What do we have?" "A medical certificate from the hospital stating that she was of sound mind at the time the will was made, testimony from the nurse and doctor, and a video recording of the procedure." "That should be enough, right?" Jeremy took off his glasses and wiped them. "I hope so. But Kingsley is very cunning. He will try to prove that even if she was conscious in the hospital, she made the decision to change the will earlier, when her mental faculties were questionable. The day of the trial came too quickly. I woke up at 5 in the morning from a nightmare in which Aunt Mira looked at me reproachfully and said, "Why did you take my money?" I didn't sleep the rest of the night, tossing and turning in bed and rehearsing my testimony. The courtroom was packed with people. I recognized several company employees, my aunt's relatives and neighbors. Even Mrs. Delilah from the dog shelter came to support me, but most of the faces expressed curiosity rather than support. People had come to watch the show. My parents sat at the plaintiff's table with Robert Kingsley, a handsome man in his 50s wearing an expensive suit. They looked much better than when they came to see me. New suits, professional hairstyles. Someone had clearly invested in their appearance. Jeremy sat next to me, nervously flipping through papers. His old suit contrasted with Kingsley's elegance. "Don't worry," he whispered. "We have a strong case." But when the hearing began, I realized he was wrong. Kingsley was a master of his craft. He methodically presented witnesses who painted a picture of a mentally unstable old woman being manipulated by a cunning young relative. Mrs. Holloway recounted how Mira forgot to lock her car and even left her purse in it. "I went over to her several times to remind her," said the neighbor. "She thanked me, but the next day it happened again." A supermarket cashier testified that Mira had often seemed confused lately. She would stand at the checkout for 5 minutes looking for her wallet, which she was holding in her hands, said the young man. And once she forgot that she had already paid for her groceries and tried to pay a second time. The worst was the doctor's testimony. Dr. Milton spoke dryly and professionally. "During the examination, I noticed signs of early dementia in the patient. She couldn't remember what she had for breakfast, confused dates, and asked the same question several times. Did you inform the patient or her relatives about this?" Kingsley asked. "I recommended additional tests, but Mrs. Coleman refused. She said she felt fine and didn't want to waste time on unnecessary procedures." When it was our turn to present our case, Jeremy called a doctor from the hospital who testified to my aunt's ability to make a will. "At the time of our conversation, the patient was completely competent," explained Dr. Reynolds. "She clearly explained her wishes, answered all questions, and showed no signs of cognitive impairment." "But that was only a few hours," Kingsley objected during cross-examination. "Could you assess her long-term ability to make rational decisions based on such a short conversation?" "No, but—" "Thank you, that's all." Then they called me. I approached the witness stand with trembling legs, feeling the eyes of the entire courtroom on me. Jeremy asked me a few simple questions about living with my aunt, our relationship, and her mental state. I told the truth, that she was an intelligent, caring woman who never showed any signs of mental illness. But then Kingsley's questions began, and I realized I was trapped. Miss Crawford, is it true that you lived in the deceased's home, rent-free, for 10 years? Yes, but I helped with the housework. Were you paid for this help? My aunt gave me pocket money and paid for my education. How much did these expenses amount to annually? I named the amount, and a murmur rippled through the room. It was a lot of money. So you had a financial interest in maintaining good relations with the deceased? I loved my aunt, not for her money. Did you discuss the inheritance with her? No, never. Never? Not even when she was ill or mentioned death? We didn't talk about it. But you knew she had no other close relatives? Yes. And you never thought about what might happen to her property after her death? I remained silent. Of course I did. Who wouldn't? Miss Crawford, did you notice any changes in the deceased's behavior in the last months of her life? No. None at all? She didn't forget things or get confused about dates. Everyone forgets things sometimes. But you lived with her in the same house. You would have noticed any serious changes, wouldn't you? Yes. So either you didn't notice the obvious signs of dementia that other people have testified to, or you are deliberately withholding that information from the court. Objection! Jeremy exclaimed. Objection sustained, said the judge. But it was too late. Kingsley had already planted the seeds of doubt. The trial lasted 3 days. Every day I left the courtroom broken and devastated. Jeremy tried to keep my spirits up, but I could see in his eyes that things were not going well. On the last day, Kingsley delivered his closing argument, and his words hit the mark. What you have before you is a case of manipulation and greed. A lonely, sick old woman fell victim to someone who took advantage of her trust and mental vulnerability. For decades, Mira Coleman had planned to leave her fortune to charity, but in the last months of her life, when her mind began to fail her, she suddenly changed her mind in favor of the person who had the most access to her and the greatest opportunity to influence her. When the judge announced a recess to deliver the verdict, I knew I had lost. The 3 days of waiting for the court's decision were the longest of my life. I couldn't eat, sleep, or concentrate on my work. Patricia was already openly discussing with other employees what would happen to the company if I lost the case. Some clients began to cancel contracts, unwilling to deal with a company embroiled in legal battles. On Friday evening, I sat in my aunt's bedroom looking at her photos. In one, she was standing outside the Norfolk office with a sign that read, Coleman Insurance, young and ambitious. In another, she was petting a dog at a shelter, smiling more sincerely than I had ever seen her smile. The last photo was taken last summer on the beach in Virginia Beach, with my aunt knee-deep in the water, her business suit pants rolled up. I'm sorry, I whispered to the photo. Maybe I did use you without realizing it. My phone beeped, a message from an unknown number. Margot, this is Dr. Reynolds from the hospital. Can we meet? I have something important for your case. I met him at a small cafe near the hospital. Dr. Reynolds looked tired and agitated. I've been thinking about the court hearing, he began, and I remembered something that might be important. On the day your aunt rewrote her will, she asked me to record it on video. My heart skipped a beat. Record it on video? She said she wanted everything to be recorded. I thought it was for legal purposes, so I took a short video on my phone, but then I forgot about it. We had a very busy day. Do you still have that video? Yes. He took out his phone. Would you like to see it? Aunt Mira was on the screen. She was lying in a hospital bed, her face bruised from the accident, but her eyes were clear and determined. I, Mira Coleman, she said clearly and distinctly, being of sound mind and body, wish to state the following. I am changing my will and leaving all my property, my house, my company, and my money, to my niece, Margot Crawford. She did not ask me to do this and does not know about my decision. I am doing this because, over the past 10 years, she has become the daughter I never had. She cared for me not for money, but out of love. Margot, if you are watching this, know that you deserve this more than anyone else. The video lasted only a minute and a half, but that was enough. A clock on the wall was also visible in the frame. The video was filmed an hour before the official will was drawn up. "Why didn't you tell me about this earlier?" I asked in a trembling voice. "I didn't think it was important. The legal will was drawn up properly, but after the court started talking about your aunt's insanity..." The doctor shook his head. "She was perfectly sane. Even more than that, she was determined and focused." I called Jeremy immediately. He arrived at the cafe in 10 minutes, and after watching the video, whistled. "This changes everything," he said. "This directly refutes all claims of insanity. We will file a motion for a retrial." But the following Monday, when we were supposed to file the motion, something unexpected happened. Kingsley called me. "Miss Crawford, could you meet with me and my clients? We would like to discuss the possibility of a settlement agreement." The meeting took place in Kingsley's office, a luxurious room with wood paneling and expensive paintings. My parents sat in leather chairs, but they didn't look as confident as they had during the trial. "We are prepared to withdraw the lawsuit," Kingsley said without preamble, "in exchange for compensation in the amount of $500,000. "No," I replied immediately. "Margot, be reasonable," Sharon interjected. $500,000 is a lot of money. You can start a new life." "I already have a new life. The one Aunt Mira left me." $1 million, Kingsley said. "That's our final offer." "Our final offer is $0, I snapped. "Goodbye." As I got up to leave, Dennis couldn't resist. "You'll regret this." "We found more witnesses. There are people who heard you promise to take care of Mira in exchange for her inheritance." I stopped. "What people?" "It doesn't matter. The main thing is that now we have proof of your manipulation." Jeremy put his hand on my shoulder. "Let's go, Margot." "Let them say what they want." But when we left the office, I saw that Jeremy was upset. "What's bothering you?" I asked. "Maybe they're not bluffing." Kingsley wouldn't have offered $1 million if he wasn't sure he would win. For the next 2 days, we prepared for the worst. Jeremy tried to find out who the new witnesses were, but to no avail. Then, early Wednesday morning, I got a call from a man I didn't know. "Miss Crawford?" "This is Marcus Walsh, private investigator. I used to work for your parents, but there's something you need to know." We met at the same cafe where I had seen Dr. Reynolds. Marcus Walsh was a short man of about 45 with tired eyes. "Your parents hired me to find dirt on you," he said without preamble. "But what I found made me change my mind." He placed a folder on the table. "They lied about everything. About living in Los Angeles, about trying to get back to you. In fact, they spent the last 5 years in prison for credit card fraud. They were released just a month ago." I opened the folder. There were copies of court decisions, photographs, documents. "Who is financing their lawyer?" I asked. "It's an interesting story." "Kingsley works for a percentage of the winnings, but someone is paying the current expenses. I found out that it's Patricia Lomax." "What?" "She has an agreement with your parents. If they win the case, she will gain control of the company, and if they lose, she loses nothing." My world was turned upside down. Patricia, who had been helping me all along, was actually working against me. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Walsh looked sad. "Because I knew your aunt. She once helped me when I lost my job with the police. She gave me a loan to start my own business when no bank would deal with me. She was a good person and doesn't deserve to have her memory tarnished for money." He stood up. "The folder also contains recordings of your parents' conversations with Patricia. They discussed how to remove you from running the company. Use this wisely." That evening, I sat in my house with the detective's folder and Dr. Reynolds' video. I finally had evidence that could close the case, but along with the relief came sadness. How many people were willing to destroy me for money? Even Patricia, whom I considered an ally. The next morning, we arrived at court, armed with new evidence. Jeremy filed a motion to consider the new materials, and the judge agreed to hear them. When the video with my aunt began to play on the screen, a murmur rippled through the courtroom. Mira's voice rang out clearly and convincingly. "I'm doing this because in 10 years, she has become the daughter I never had. She took care of me not for money, but out of love." Then Jeremy announced the results of the detective's investigation. The audio recordings of conversations between the parents and Patricia sounded like a verdict. "The girl is too young and naive," Patricia said. "Once we gain control, we'll be able to run the company properly." "What should we do with her?" Dennis's voice asked. "We'll give her a small position in a branch office. Let her play manager, while we make the real decisions." Kingsley tried to protest, but it was too late. The judge looked indignant. "The case is closed," he announced. "Meyer Coleman's will is declared fully valid. In addition, I am forwarding the materials on possible perjury to the prosecutor's office." My parents rushed out of the courtroom immediately after the verdict was announced, without even looking in my direction. Kingsley also quickly gathered his papers and left, and I just sat there, unable to believe that it was all over. "We won," Jeremy said, smiling from ear to ear. "Margot, we won." But the victory did not bring me the joy I had expected. Instead, I felt empty and tired. That evening, I went to the cemetery to visit Aunt Mira's grave. I laid fresh white chrysanthemums and sat down on a bench nearby. "Well, that's it," I said quietly. "Now I'm officially a wealthy orphan. How do you like that?" The wind rustled the branches of the trees, and it seemed as if my aunt was answering me. The following Monday, I went to the company office. My colleagues congratulated me on the victory, but I saw caution in their eyes. Patricia didn't show up for work. She submitted her resignation by email. "What now?" Jennifer, the chief accountant, asked me. "Now we work," I replied, just like Aunt Mira did. But I knew that everything would change. I was no longer a naive girl who believed in the goodness of people. The last few months had taught me that money changes people, and that trust is a luxury I can no longer afford. A week later, I donated $50,000 to the dog shelter, as my aunt had requested. Mrs. Delilah cried with happiness. "Mira would be proud of you," she said. Maybe, but I was no longer the girl my Aunt Mira would be proud of. I had become tougher, more distrustful. I learned to protect myself and what belonged to me. Sometimes in the evenings, I sit in my aunt's kitchen with a cup of coffee and look at the empty chair across from me. I won the war for the inheritance, but I lost something more important. My belief that people can love selflessly. Maybe that's the real price of wealth. Not money, not a house, not a company, but the realization that you will always doubt whether you are loved for who you are or for what you have. Aunt Mira left me more than just an inheritance. She left me a lesson. Sometimes the most precious thing you can lose is the ability to trust.